Hello, welcome to Wednesday night, which means Taxes and Retirement Live. I am back after a week off last week as I was away in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina for a week-long dance competition for my daughters. Not me. I am not a dancer. You do not want to see me dance. It will be painful to watch, as painful, if not more, than these horrible dad jokes I hit you with every week. But glad to be back. Hopefully you did not miss too much last week. Tonight's topic, all about Roth conversions. I don't really have a great title for this, and I wasn't quite sure where to go with it. I wanted to do something that's kind of like a primer and sort of touches on all things Roth conversion. Consider it like a intro to intermediate level summary of kind of all the key things to be aware of with Roth conversions, from what they are, how to do them, when to consider them, etc. So I'll go through all that. Next week, a special guest will be Beth Rowan. She is an expert in emergency preparedness and disaster recovery. This one should be cool. I'm looking forward to it. It'll definitely be cool. It's off the beaten path from what we typically talk about here in the group, but nonetheless, I think very important. And she's going to focus it around, considerations for those in or near retirement. So that should be a good one next week. Definitely tune in for that. All right, let me do the dad jokes for the night. First, I just saw on the news that a man has discovered how to do origami backwards. More on this story as it unfolds. Cha. Next, a man walks into a bar with a slab of asphalt under his arm. He shouts, "A beer, please, and one for the road." And I will leave you with, I applied for a job as a carpenter the other day. I had to demonstrate my skill with a piece of wood. I nailed it. Yeah, I am a woodworker, so I thought that one was cool. Let me just see. Okay, comments are working very good. And before we get going, I will do the disclaimer. This video is only general explanations and education. It is definitely not specific tax, legal, or investment, or Roth conversion advice for that matter. Before considering acting on anything you see in this video, first consult with your tax, legal, or investment advisor, which, as I say all the time, I am not. I'm just some random guy on Facebook tonight talking about Roth conversions. Cool. All right. We have, Cody Garrett, jump into Roth like David Lee Roth, Van Halen. Yes, Cody. Wah, wah. Good one. Danced out in the house, indeed. So let me pull up my slides. This one, as I was making these slides, there's a lot of words on these. I tried to keep it as succinct as possible, but there's like so much running through my head that I thought was worth mentioning when trying to talk about like all things Roth conversion. I realized this is a bigger topic. Could have easily broken this up into multiple weeks. So I'll try to keep the slides as short and painless as possible. As far as comments and questions, normally I ask to hold all the questions to the end, and I just kind of run through my bit. But I think what I'll do now, because there is so many different sort of subtopics within tonight's topic of Roth conversions, is I'll finish a slide or two, then kind of pause and look at questions, and I'll answer questions to the extent they relate to what we just talked about, or if it's something I'm going to address in a later slide, I will let you know. So let me get into it, because there is a lot of stuff here. Let me pull up my screen share. Share screen, do that, share. Okay, cool. So let me first start with what is a Roth account. And some of this will be very elementary for all of you. Some of you, this may be the first time you're hearing all these things, and then the rest of you will be somewhere in between. So if these are things you already know, apology, but my goal with this is there's been lots of people joining the group throughout the months. I know we talk about Roths all the time, but for people who are kind of new-ish to the group or to the next level detail of all this stuff, I thought tonight would be a good way to kind of do an overview of kind of all things Roth. So before talking about Roth conversions, let's first talk about what a Roth account is in the first place. It's a special designation of account type where all growth and distributions are tax-free. And tax-free, assuming you meet a few qualifying conditions. I won't get into them right now. I've done different videos and have other lives about Roth withdrawal rules and criteria. But the point is, Roth isn't an investment in and of itself. It's just an account type. Specifically, it's an account type where there's special tax treatment to it. All the money that goes into it is already been taxed, or money that you had to have paid tax on. While it's in the account, there's no tax along the way on any growth, dividends, interest, etc. And then when you take the money out, that's also all tax-free. Again, assuming you meet the couple bits of qualifying conditions for it to be a qualified withdrawal. Roths are the opposite of traditional tax-deferred accounts, like IRAs, individual retirement accounts, or 401ks, 403bs, TSP, 457. In those accounts, you get a tax deferral. It's not a deduction, it's just deferral. When you put the money in, you get to take a sort of tax deduction in that year, but the tax doesn't go away. You just have to pay the tax at some point down the road when you eventually take the money out. So Roths are the opposite of that. You pay tax first before the money goes into a Roth, then the money comes out tax-free, versus traditional tax-deferred accounts. You get a tax deferral / deduction on the front end, but every cent that comes out will eventually be taxable. You can have Roth versions of IRAs, 401ks, 403b. So when someone says, I have a Roth, a quote unquote Roth, what does that mean? You don't exactly know. Generally, it probably means it's a Roth IRA, but there could be Roth employer plans like 401ks, 403bs. But again, Roth is just simply, it's a type of account. It's not specifically referring to IRAs or 401ks. It's just the tax treatment of an account where the money that goes in is already taxed, grows tax-free, comes out tax-free if you meet a few different criteria. So now, what is a Roth conversion? Conversion is simply when you transfer, aka convert, money or securities from a traditional tax-deferred account into a Roth account. Simple example, you have money in a traditional IRA that you contributed on a pre-tax basis throughout the years, meaning you did not yet pay tax on any of that money. You will when you take it out. Well, you can convert, you can transfer some of that money from that tax-deferred account into a Roth IRA. That's a conversion. Technically, functionally, you're just transferring, but in the eyes of the IRS, it's a conversion because you're taking money from one type of tax bucket, meaning money that's never been taxed, tax-deferred, traditional tax-deferred accounts, and you're putting it into a Roth account where it's a completely different tax regime. All the money gets taxed prior to going in. So since the money going into the Roth needs to have already been taxed, and the money coming out of the tax-deferred account has not yet been taxed, you have to pay tax on the amount of money you convert from the traditional IRA to the Roth IRA, or from the traditional 401k to the Roth 401k. Good so far? So that's a conversion, plain and simple. How do you actually do one? Now, let's talk in the context of IRAs first. Assuming your IRA and your Roth IRA are at the same custodian, so both at Vanguard, both at Fidelity, both at Schwab, whatever, it's really, really simple. You call them up, find out what their process is. There's probably a few different ways you can do it. Generally, there's going to be a form you can fill out, either paper form that you write, scan, fax, email back to them, whatever. Maybe an online form where you just fill in the blanks. Or you can, some brokers, some custodians will let you do verbal authorization, call them up and say, hey, I want to convert X from my IRA to my Roth IRA. To do the verbals, you probably have to fill out some form first, where that form is granting them permission to take your verbal request going forward. You can't just call up out of the blue and say, hey, convert, or at least probably not. Hopefully there's some sort of checks and balance to make sure it's actually you requesting it in the first place. But that's kind of it. It's a simple form. You can usually fill out or request a conversion in a matter of under a minute. Often, the hardest part is usually finding your account number to populate into the form. Outside of that, it's just check a box, write in a number, and you're kind of done. Now, you can convert cash. So if you have some cash hanging out in your IRA, you can simply say, hey, take 20 grand of that, convert that to my Roth IRA. Or if your accounts are at the same custodian again, so both at Vanguard, both at Fidelity, whatever, you can tell them, hey, transfer these 25 shares of XYZ from my Roth IRA from my traditional IRA to my Roth IRA. They will transfer them over. Now, the value of that transfer, of that conversion, will be the closing price of those shares on the day they process that transfer / conversion. So if you wanted to convert a precise amount, like you want to say convert exactly $30,000 from my IRA to my Roth, then you probably want to do cash, which means you would have to sell some things within your IRA first, free up at least $30,000 of cash, and then instruct them to convert exactly $30,000 of cash. Because if you transfer securities and you pick an amount of securities that equals $30,000 roughly, you don't know exactly what price those securities are going to be at the close of the day in which your custodian does a transfer. Could be a little more than 30,000, could be a little less. So if every penny of conversion matters, you want to transfer cash. Whereas if you're just okay with the general amount, it's okay to transfer securities. As far as, so that's a conversion from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. As far as doing a conversion inside your employer plan, and by employer plan, I mean 401k, 403b, TSP, or 457, you may or may not be able to. It all depends how your employer plan was set up. Some allow what's called in-plan conversions, meaning you can take money from your traditional 401k, for example, and transfer it within the plan into a Roth bucket inside your 401k. That's called the in-plan conversion. The money doesn't leave out to an IRA. It all stays within your 401k. Now, not all employers allow this. Some do, increasingly more do, but if I had to guess, I'd say the majority probably don't at the moment. Less than 50% probably allow it. Yeah, it's just my guess. I could be wrong, but it is something that's becoming more common, thankfully. And how you do it in your employer, that all depends. You'd have to ask your employer. Chances are it's probably like doing it, from IRA to Roth IRA. You call them up. Maybe it's a verbal thing. They probably, or maybe have a thing when you log into your 401k or 403b, they may have a thing right on their website where you can transact a conversion. Or maybe it's a special form you have to request. They send it to you, you fill it out, send it back. It all depends. You'd have to ask. Next. So who can do a Roth conversion? Well, anyone, and as far as IRAs go, anyone who has a traditional IRA is able to do a Roth conversion from that IRA to a Roth IRA. There are no limits around age, income, or earnings. And the reason why I say this is because, to make contributions into an IRA or Roth IRA, there are limits around earnings. Like, you need to have earned income. If you don't have earned income, you cannot contribute money into an IRA or Roth IRA. As far as income, if your income is too high, you cannot directly contribute money to a Roth IRA. You can to a traditional IRA, but you may not be able to take a deduction for it if your income's too high. And age, IRAs and Roth IRAs don't have age limits to start with. It's just kind of indirectly there's an age limit, because if you don't have any sort of earnings, you can't contribute. But regardless, if you have a traditional IRA, doesn't matter how much money you have or how much income you make or how old you are or what your earnings are or lack thereof, anyone can do a conversion from an IRA to a Roth IRA. As I touched on before, the ability to convert within your employer plan is completely dependent on whether or not your plan allows it. If they don't allow it, you flat out can't do it. If they do allow it, you can do it. Pretty simple so far. Cool. So that's who can do a Roth conversion. When to consider doing Roth conversions. Now we're starting to get juicy. There's no single black and white analysis or kind of answer to this question, which I know is frustrating. One of the more common questions throughout the group is, do I need to do conversions, or when should I do conversions, or how much should I convert? And there's not firm answers to any of those things. The answer is always, well, it depends. And it depends on a lot of educated guessing about the future. It depends on knowing much more about your financial status and situation. That's why, anyone who tells you over Facebook or any other public forum, if that person knows nothing about you and says, yes, you should convert, or no, you shouldn't, take that with a grain of salt, because they really don't know you and your full circumstances. But anyway, general food for thought about when to consider doing conversions is if the majority of your retirement savings is in all traditional tax deferred accounts, like traditional IRAs, traditional 401ks, then maybe you want to consider it. You won't, if all or the majority of your retirement savings is in traditional tax deferred money, you don't have a lot of control over the taxability of it. You have no tax diversity, if you will. Every dollar you pull out of your investment account is going to be taxed when you pull it out, both at the state level, federal level, and state level. If you live in a state that has income tax and taxes you on retirement account distributions, not all states do. Like Pennsylvania, for example, does not tax retirement account distributions. Most other states that have income tax do. So, and taxes are almost certainly going up. I can't say that with 100% certainty, but I'd bet my arm. Well, maybe not my arm. Let me hedge myself. I bet one of your arms that taxes will be going up at some point in the future, and you'll have no control. You'll be at the mercy of whatever taxes are in the future. So if all your money is traditional tax deferred accounts where you're taxed when you take it out, you'll be subject to whatever tax legislation is at the time. So by diversifying and getting some of your money out of tax deferred accounts and into Roth accounts, that's when it starts to make some sense. So if you do think conversions are something that makes some sense for you, when do you want to do it? Generally speaking, it's when your income at the time and or the tax environment, tax rates at the time are lower now than they will be in the future. This is where the educated guessing starts to come into play. If you are in your peak earning years, for example, making $200,000-$300,000 and you plan on retiring next year, with certainty that income's going away once you retire, right? So your income now is higher than it will be in a year from now. So maybe now isn't the right time for you to consider doing conversions because you already have a lot of income. But if you just retired, your wages stopped, then maybe you want to consider conversions because you'll otherwise potentially have lower income. And I'll touch on this more in a bit. And tax rates are already sort of talked about. We know now, objectively speaking, federal tax rates are the lowest they've been in any of our lifetimes, and they're only going up. They're not. Well, I'm almost certain they're only going up. There's clearly lots of talk about tax rate increases in various forms, not just simply tax rates themselves, but other things like capital gain taxes changing, tax rates themselves changing. So to be determined when taxes increase and by how much and in what shape, but rest assured, it's almost a certainty that taxes will be going up. So we know now taxes are lower than they will be in the future. So that's another reason to sort of consider, if you plan on doing conversions, now-ish might be the right time before taxes do eventually go up. And also, if you do, again, think conversions make sense for you, when security prices are depressed, that could be a good time to do it. This isn't the most recent version of my slides, I'm just realizing. All right, hopefully it's okay. So you can get more bang for your buck, and here's what I mean by that. So if you decide you want to convert $100, you already know your conversion amount for the year. And let's assume the shares you want to convert are $1 a share, right? If you convert those shares out of your traditional IRA, you'll only be able to convert 100 shares now, right? You're converting $100 and it's $1 per share. You convert 100 shares. What if, coincidentally, there's this huge sell-off in the market such that now those same shares cost only 50 cents per share instead of $1? Now you can convert 200 shares instead of 100 for that same $100 of conversion. So you get more bang for your buck. So now, if and when those shares eventually rebound from their low of 50 cents and they come back up, all that subsequent growth will be in your tax-free Roth environment, as opposed to if you left them in your traditional IRA, all that growth would eventually be taxed, because again, all dollars you take out of a traditional tax-deferred account are subject to tax. So when securities are low, stock prices are low, that's a good, all else equal, that's a good time to do conversions. Okay. One thing, hold on a second. Yeah, I don't think this is my most recent version. Oh, well. Okay, so one thing I want to show kind of graphically is going back to this tax diversity thing. Having different account types to draw income from can help you manage taxes in the future. Again, especially if taxes will be going up, having some money in like tax-free Roth accounts to pull from can help out. So let's just, for example, here's a basic graph. Let's assume this level of income is where a 10% tax bracket stops. This level of income, and it doesn't matter what these dollar amounts are, this is just a visual for now. This is where a 12% tax bracket stops. This is where 22 stops, and then et cetera. So let's assume you have Social Security, and your taxable amount of Social Security is already beyond the 10% tax bracket. It goes up to here. And then you need some more money in addition to Social Security. So maybe you pull some money out of your tax deferred accounts, like your traditional IRA 401k. But let's say you only pull out enough to fill up to take you to the top of the 12% tax bracket. So that's good. This position here, you're only paying, federally at least, some at 10, some at 12% tax, plus whatever state tax you're subject to, if any. If you still have needs for additional income above and beyond this level, this 12% bracket, this is where it can make sense to have a Roth. Because look, let's say you take the additional money you need this year out of a Roth account, and recall the big magic, the big benefit of Roth accounts is distributions are not taxable. Again, assuming you meet the few qualification criteria, the two most common ones are you're at least 59 and a half and your first Roth IRA is at least 5 years old. If you meet those two things, all monies you take out of any of your Roth IRAs are tax and penalty free. So this is just a very basic dumbed down example of like how you can control your sources of income. Whereas if you did not have a Roth account and all you had was traditional tax deferred accounts, and this was the amount of income you need to pull out, well, guess what? Your tax deferred withdrawal now is going to be this large, this whole thing, which means you're now going to have some of that income, some of that withdrawal would be taxed at 22%. Now, 22% doesn't sound like a horrible number, and it may not be. But again, fast forward to the future, who knows what brackets may be? What if this is now 30% perhaps? So now it starts to become a little more compelling. The benefit of having a Roth account is you can kind of have some control over the taxability of your monies. Okay, what's next here? Yes. Okay. So this is the most recent version. Good. I thought it wasn't for a second. Let me just pause quick and I'll take a quick glance at these questions. I'll leave my screen share up just because. But anyway, what is this? So not really related to Roth conversions, I guess. I made an estimated tax payment for June and check hasn't cleared. Will I be penalized? I don't know. I mean, if it's post dated or something, you have some way to prove the check was sent in before the June 15th deadline, then hopefully not. But I frankly don't know the answer to that. Good question. What's the thought process again? Why you think tax will go up in the future? Good. So whoever this is, good question. One of the answers is this from Hussein. So TCJA stands for Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. This was the Trump tax plan, if you will, that went into place in 2018. It was already set that the tax rates, the reduced tax rates that were currently in that went into place in 2018 are already set to sunset/expire at the end of 2025, at which point starting in 2026, they will go back up to the higher pre-Tax Cuts and Jobs Act levels that we had in 2017. So this is fact. We already know objectively that federal tax rates will be going up in 2026, if not sooner. How much will they go up? It all depends on the bracket. They go up anywhere from 2 to 3 or 4%, if I remember correctly, across the different brackets. So we know for fact federal tax rates will be going up in 2026, if not sooner. Now, why do I say if not sooner? Tax legislation is extremely political, as you probably all know, and I try not to make anything in this group politicized, but just a matter of fact, the Biden administration does have lots of different plans and ways that it would like to change the tax code, a lot of which involves increases of various sorts. So long as the Congress and the presidency stays Democratic or Democratic majority, expect there will be increases sooner than 2026. Sooner than the predefined, the preset sunsetting of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Now, when these the Biden tax plan will go into place, who knows? There's not even really firm legislation out yet. It's all just kind of talking points, which I think are typically put out as feelers to the world, to the public, to Congress, to tax think tanks. Biden or any president for that matter kind of floats out a tax agenda just to see how it's received. If the entire world universally bashes a certain provision, well, guess what? That provision is not going to ultimately make it into some kind of bill. But anything that kind of gets some traction or gets minimal pushback, those are the things that are likely to be put into a bill to eventually make its way through Congress to be voted upon, to ultimately be signed by the president into law. But nothing has been codified into a bill yet. So we don't know exactly what will happen or when, but it's very safe to say taxes will be going up probably sooner than 2026. Okay. And this is just in response to the person who sent in a check. Yeah, the best way to send payments to the IRS is electronically. There's a website. EFTPS, you don't even have to do. This is a more kind of robust, you can set up ongoing payments and stuff. If you're just looking to make a once a quarter payment, you can just go to irs.gov/payments, I think it is. And you can do a direct ACH transfer from your bank. There's no fee. You can set it up, within the course of a minute or two. It's really simple. And that effectively guarantees it gets there, as opposed to mailing a check where it could get lost in the mail. But yeah, good comment. And finally, just Cannon said, security prices depressed on Monday when the market was down almost 800 points. Yeah. Just side note, I don't quote market moves in terms of points. That's, I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but without the context of knowing where the index actually is, the points don't really matter. I like to view things in percentage. That has some meaning. So anyway, so yeah, the major stock indices were down a couple percent. I think depends which, give or take more than that. But yes, Monday was a decent day for that. Now, in my view, a 1 day drop, even if it's 2% and a little, that's pretty big. If you can be lucky enough to time it on that day, sure, but that's not really that big of a movement. I mean, that's just kind of daily noise, as you can see already that, that kind of corrected itself. It's really the kind of sustained big drops, like a 10 or 20% drop from a peak. Those are like the big pullbacks that you want to take advantage of. But I realize as I'm saying this, that's market timing, and I don't advocate market timing. So you don't know when the bottom of a drop is going to happen. So like, don't wait around trying to guess exactly when securities are most depressed and then do your conversion then, because who knows, you can be wrong. But generally speaking, all else equal, if stocks are down a lot from where they have been, that's a decent time to convert. All else, again, all else equal. Okay. So when to do Roth conversions now? So like what I mean by this is kind of what time in the year to do Roth conversions. If you decided you're going to do conversions this year, when in the year do you do it? Now, there's a few different schools of thought, but here's the things to keep in mind. Historically, markets go up more than they go down. So with that in mind, you'd want to convert as early as possible in the year, just because, again, historically speaking, stocks generally go up. So the earlier you convert, the lower the price at which you're converting. So January 1st, let's say. But however, conversions cannot be undone. So you don't want to convert a big amount in January and then realize at the end of the year, oops, I made more money than I thought in my job or in other things. Now I have much higher income than I thought, which could be a problem. So because you may not know the rest of your income until late in the year, and one of the usual suspects of things that kind of sneak up on you income-wise is if you have mutual funds you own in a regular taxable brokerage account, not an IRA, not a Roth IRA, but regular taxable brokerage account. Many mutual funds, except those that are passively, index-based funds, most mutual funds will pass through to you capital gains from the buying and selling activity, or the selling activity within the fund during the year. So even though you didn't sell any of your fund during the year, you'll still get passed through to you taxable capital gains from positions the fund manager sold within that fund. So like early December, mid-December, guess what? You'll get a notice saying, hey, you were just distributed, $20,000 of capital gain distributions. That's taxable income to you. So if you do have large mutual fund positions in a regular brokerage account, and you plan on doing conversions, you probably want to wait until closer to the end of the year, because by then you'll have a much better picture of what your wages were, what your other random sources of income were. Like maybe someone had a part-time job for 2 months that you weren't planning on, spouse or something. Whatever your capital gain distributions are from your mutual funds for the year, you usually find out in December. And any other surprises, like, maybe you sold some other stocks early in the year that you decided to get out of. So, you now know what that income is going to be. So whereas what I first said before was convert as early in the year as possible because things generally go up and you'd rather convert at low prices. What I just said now completely contradicts that and says, no, you want to wait towards the end of the year because then you have a better picture of what your income is. You don't want to overdo it. And this is where I'm going with these two things. Conversions cannot be undone, like this first bullet here says. So if you over convert in January and then you end up making much more income than you expected, and you get to tax return time, you're like, oh, junk. I did not plan on having this much income. Now I'm in a higher tax bracket than I want it to be. That's bad. You can't undo that. So if you wait towards the end of the year, you'll have a better picture of how much room you have income-wise till you hit the next tax bracket or something like that. That's when you really want to fine-tune your Roth conversion for that year in most cases. Now, if you want to, like if there is a big drop during the middle of the year, maybe then you do some of your conversion. Like let's assume you plan for the year. Okay, I'm targeting to do $50,000 of conversions this year, and it's January. You probably want to wait a little bit. Maybe if there is a pullback during the year, like a 10% drop in the markets, okay, maybe you do half your conversion amount then, do 25 grand. Then for the other 25, you wait until the end of the year, see what the rest of your income is. And then guess what? Maybe you only have 20 grand left of space until you hit the next tax bracket. So maybe you end up only converting another 20 and not doing the full 25 and therefore not converting a full 50 over the year. So there's a lot of factors to consider, but this is kind of the food for thought of when in the year to consider doing your conversions, assuming you do plan on doing conversions. Cool. Next, paying tax on Roth conversions. Dun, dun, dun. No one likes tax. So amounts you convert, this is where it gets tricky. And I've done other videos just on this. This is when I was doing this slide, this is when I realized, wow, tonight's topic is like 10 different topics rolled up into one. So I'm just kind of glancing over a lot of things here. When you convert money from a tax deferred account, like a traditional IRA, it's possible that that not all the money in that traditional IRA is pre-taxed. Maybe some of the money in there you did not take a deduction / deferral for, therefore that money's already after tax. Now the IRS will not double tax you. If you convert any monies that were already taxed, you don't have to pay tax again on that conversion because they were taxed. It's only the pre-tax money that was not already taxed. If and when you convert that, you have to pay tax on that at the time of the conversion. So where I'm going with this is there's something called the pro rata rule. If you have a traditional IRA that's a mix of, let's say, 90% pre-tax money and 10% already taxed money, any dollar you convert, 90% of that will be taxable, 10% of it will not be, because that 10% is the prorated portion of the money that was already taxed. So anyway, point is, when you convert, some or all of it will be taxable, and it's taxable in the year of the conversion. It goes into your gross income, just like your wages, just like your bank interest, just like pension income. Conversions are included in your gross income. Even though you don't get to use the money's going from one account to another, right? It's still taxable income, just like someone were to pay you wages. So keep that in mind. It is taxed as ordinary income, but not all of it's taxed if some of it is already taxed the money in your traditional account. So definitely keep that in mind. It will be taxable income. It will be included in your gross income. Now, in addition to just having ordinary income taxes you have to pay, and great timing here, I see Alan Thomas just coincidentally posted the same thing. There's other sort of sneaky lurking tax things that may come into play from you jacking up your gross income from conversions. One is, if you're on Social Security, the amount of your Social Security that's subject to being taxed is based on how much other income you have. I won't get into the details here because that's its own complicated formula. But all else equal, the more gross income, other sources of gross income you have, the more of your Social Security will be pulled into taxation. Now, for some people, if you're already at $100,000 of income for the year, your Social Security is already at the max taxation. At this point, it's a non-issue. But if you're at lower levels of income, 20, 30, 40,000 bucks, not all of your Social Security is going to be taxed. If you start doing conversions, more of your Social Security will be pulled into being taxed at that point. You also, for those of you who are on Affordable Care Act, healthcare.gov insurance, you may be eligible for subsidies, which are technically called premium tax credits. If you can keep your gross income, technically your modified gross income, but it's largely the same as your regular gross income. If you can keep that low enough, within 4 times the federal poverty level, you may be eligible for some subsidies, some tax credit subsidies on your ACA health insurance premiums. Now, for this year and I think 2022 or no, I don't think so. Just 2021. The 4 times federal poverty level thing is temporarily moved. There's some other larger kind of phase out mechanics that are in play. So more people now are eligible for these Affordable Care Act premiums. The point is, if you do conversions, they will increase your gross income, and that may bump you out of eligibility for getting ACA tax credit. So that's another sort of tax thing to keep in mind. If you're on Medicare, or not even on Medicare, if you're 63, starting the year you're 63 or older, the amount of premiums you pay for Medicare are based on your reported gross income, technically modified adjusted gross income, from 2 years prior. And guess what? Conversions jack up your gross income, which jacks up your modified adjusted gross income, which means your conversions may lead to you having to pay some or higher Medicare premiums as well. So keep that in mind. And there's another sneaky tax called the net investment income tax. Long story short, if you're single and have more than $200,000 of gross income, or married and have more than $250,000 of combined gross income, all of your passive sources of investment income, dividends, interest, capital gains, rental income, those will all have an additional 3.8% tax on them. Nor does the net investment income tax. So food for thought. Conversions increase your gross income, and not only does that mean higher effective, tax rates, it could also mean other sort of sneaky, stealthy, hidden taxes coming into play that you weren't aware of, such that your effective tax rate in the conversion could be much larger than just the regular, marginal tax rate that you're thinking of. Okay, I'll stop there. There's a hairy one, but I thought this was important to mention. Another thing about taxes on conversions, and I'll take another break for some questions. Someone already mentioned estimated tax payments. So estimated tax payments are like 2 sessions in and of itself. So I'll try to touch on this briefly. But again, assuming that some or all of your conversion will be taxable, you're going to have to pay the tax on that conversion. How do you do that? Ideally, you want to pay it throughout the year as opposed to waiting to pay it all at your tax return time, because then you may be subject to an underpayment penalty, which most times isn't going to be drastic, a few $100 maybe, but still avoid that if you can. There's a few ways you can make the payments. One is simply increase tax withholdings. If you're still working and have W-2 income, you got paychecks. If you're on Social Security, if you're taking IRA distributions, if you have pension, if you have annuities, you can increase the amount of tax withheld from those things. And that additional increase can be what you use to in effect pay the incremental tax you'll have to pay on these conversions. Or if you don't have sources of income from which to make withholdings, or you choose not to, you can make estimated tax payments. Now, this is where things get complicated and convoluted, trying to figure out how much you have to make in estimated payments and when. But let's just assume if you know for the year that you're going to convert $50,000 and your incremental tax on that's going to be 15 grand, let's say. I'll make the math even. Let's assume 16 grand. You ideally want to split that 16,000 up and make 4 quarterly estimated payments of 4,000 each. Split it out evenly. You do that throughout the 4 quarters and you're good. That's how you can pay your tax. Now, you may say, great, but what if in January I didn't plan on making conversions? All of a sudden in October, the market takes a dump and I decide, what? I'm going to do a big conversion now. So you do it in October. You did not make any estimated payments the first few quarters. Now you're in the 4th quarter. You're like, oh man, now what do? You can't go back and make estimated payments. Well, now you can make one big fat lump estimated payment of 16 grand in our example in that 4th quarter. But it's going to take a little extra work on your tax return now. You're going to have to do what's called to annualize your income on Form 2210. It's a little clunkier to do. But if you don't have the foresight or the ability to do your estimated payments in 4 equal chunks throughout the year, and you want or need to do it all in 1 quarter, you'll have to do that annualization process in your tax return. And that just simply says the estimated payment I made was based on the quarter in which I recognized the income. By default, the IRS assumes your income was all earned equally throughout the year, which is why it wants you to pay your estimated taxes equally throughout the year. But if your income is indeed lumpy, then you can make your estimated taxes lumpy. You just have to do a little more work on your tax return to tick and tie the quarters of estimated payments with the quarters of when you actually realize the income. Finally, there are some ways around having to make estimated payments or additional withholdings throughout the year, and instead just waiting to your tax return time to pay the extra 16 grand in our case. There's something called safe harbors, which is the IRS says if you already withhold X amount or pay X amount throughout the year, you don't have to pay the rest. You can pay it up at your tax return time. I won't get too much into detail now, but basically, if throughout the year you pay at least 90% of what your final tax obligation is, That's good. That's one safe harbor. The other is if you pay at least 100% of what your last year's total tax obligation is. That's one safe harbor. That goes up to 110% if your income is over a certain level. Or if the total amount of tax obligation for the year is going to be under $1,000, you don't have to make any estimated payments throughout the year. So I'll leave that there. That's a rabbit hole, but just know there are some safe harbors where you can get around having to make estimated payments, and you can just get away with making one big fat lump sum at tax return time without getting hit with underpayment penalties. Okay, let me pause for some questions here. Tao, what are your thoughts on leaving Roth to heirs? If I'm an heir, I love it because it's tax-free, and I have that in another slide. So this is sort of a second order analysis and planning here. Yes, it's great for heirs, but now here's where things get challenging. There's if you know you're going to die with a fair amount of money left over, and you know it's going to your kids, to your cousins, to your parents, to whoever, hypothetically, what if they're in much lower tax brackets than you are? So what if, like, you're fairly wealthy, you have a big pension, big Social Security, you have lots of rental properties. So you, as a retiree, what if you're in a relatively high tax bracket? What if your child, for whatever host of reasons, doesn't make a lot and is in a really low tax bracket? It may be better for your child, and if you know you're leaving money to your child, it may be better to leave that child your tax deferred account, let him or her be the one to pay taxes on that, because he or she will be paying a lower tax rate than you will if you take that money out during your lifetime, or if you convert it during your lifetime, because you're in a higher tax bracket. So this is now some, like I said, next order kind of legacy wealth transfer planning here to wealth transfer tax efficiently. But that aside, if you're just simply leaving Roth to heirs, it's great for the heirs. They need to take the accounts out, empty the accounts within 10 years, but generally speaking, none of it's taxable. Some may be taxable in certain circumstances, which I'll touch on in a bit. If you're leaving a Roth to a charity, not ideal, because charities don't pay tax in the first place. So if you have some traditional tax deferred money and you have some Roth money, and you're trying to decide which one to leave to charity, which one to leave to a child, for example, leave the Roth to the child because the child won't pay tax on it. Leave the tax deferred to the charity because the charity wants to pay tax on it. Make sense? Great question. Tressa Wood, and ability to contribute to your Roth IRA if still working. Yes, I'll assume this is a response to someone else. Can you address how to prove to the IRS one has already paid taxes on the money in the IRA? You form 8606. We talk about this a lot in the group. This is the form that tracks what's called quote unquote basis. Basis in your IRA means monies on which, or contributions on which you already paid taxes. So every year, if you have already taxed money in your IRA, every year you should be filling out a form 8606 as part of your tax return. And that literally keeps a running tally of how many total already taxed contributions you made to your IRA, aka how much basis you have in your IRA. So then when you eventually take distributions or conversions, it's that form 8606 that you use to calculate the pro rata amount of how much is already taxed money, how much is not yet taxed money. So that's how you do it. That's the smoking gun, if you will. And then if the IRS would ever question you and say, no, I don't believe that you didn't take deductions on these various contributions, then you have to go back and dig through your whole tax returns and say, look, I did a $5,000 IRA contribution in 2012. Here's my 2012 tax return. I did not take a deduction. Look, IRS, here it is. That's how you ultimately have to prove it. But generally speaking, so long as you have your form 8606s and you do them every year, the IRS should be cool with that and shouldn't question that. I guess this is a question about estimated taxes. What about making monthly estimated payments? Completely unnecessary. I mean, you can if you want, but you only have to do it by the 4 quarters. The deadlines are April 15th, June 15th, September 15th, January 15th. If you want to do payments monthly, you can, but the IRS's clock is quarter by quarter, right? Whether you make payments in January, February, March, or you just make one fat payment by March 15th, it's the same in the eyes of the IRS. So kind of whatever you want to do. I'd say don't make more payments than you have to, but if you want to do it monthly, but no one's going to stop you. Okay, here's a comment about paying taxes. Since I'm in the decumulation stage, it seems easier to just make pre-tax IRA withdrawals and have 99% withheld. Exactly. I actually had a recommended client do that this past year. She used to use her RMDs, required minimum distributions, to pay her taxes. She didn't need the money, but she had to take RMDs anyway because she's over 70 and a half in her case. So she would just basically have the majority of her RMD withheld as federal and state taxes, and that's how she paid her taxes instead of farting around making estimated payments to the IRS every quarter. Last year, since RMDs weren't required, she didn't have to make an RMD. So she and I talked and figured out, okay, you're going to owe $5,000 of taxes here. Take a $5,000 IRA withdrawal and withhold 100% of it as tax, which her custodian let her do. And that was it. That's how she paid her taxes. She did a $5,000 withholding from a single IRA withdrawal. Now, the downside with that is that the IRA withdrawal itself is considered taxable income. So it's kind of like the circular thing. The more you withdraw from your IRA to have withheld, the higher your gross income is. But yes, this is definitely one option to do. And finally, before we move on, let me just check out Cody's comment here. A note about conversions affecting Medicare premiums, net investment income tax, and Social Security. Be careful not to let these stop you from considering Roth conversions. Yes. A saying I love, don't let the tail wag the dog. So yes, Cody's right. These things shouldn't necessarily be showstoppers. Just because you may get put into the NIT threshold or may get bumped into Medicare IRMA premiums, those shouldn't necessarily stop you, especially like the first level of Medicare IRMA premiums isn't that bad. Once you get up into like $400,000 or $500,000 of income, then you're paying hundreds of dollars more a month in Medicare premiums. That's not cool. But that first threshold of Medicare premiums, don't necessarily let that stop you. Point is, be aware of these things and know that, so you're not surprised when you get your tax bill or when you get your Medicare statement for the year. That your conversion can have an impact on these things, but you don't necessarily let them stop you. And I don't know if tick and tie is a New Jersey thing. Perhaps. I've heard it here. I'm from New Jersey, so it could be. Okay, moving on. Next, potential benefits of Roth conversions. And note I said potential. I don't want to sound like Roth conversions are a panacea or they are the right thing to do or the best thing to do for everyone. I'm not saying these benefits will actually manifest themselves or be present for you in your circumstances, but these are the benefits that can be from doing conversions. As I touched on before, simply better diversity and control of the taxability of your money in the future. If your income is going to be higher in the future and or your effective tax rate is going to be higher in the future, having more money in Roth at that time will let you better control that, as I showed in that little graph before. So whatever the future may hold for tax legislation, no matter how high things may get, if you have different buckets from which to pull your money, some is always taxable like IRAs, some is never taxable like Roth accounts, some is maybe taxable like traditional brokerage accounts. You can kind of wangle your way through and hopefully better manage your taxes, as opposed to if all your money's in tax deferred, you're completely at the mercy of whatever tax legislation is. You need money, you have to take it, it's going to be taxed, you have no control over it. So that's one of the benefits. For those who are married, there's something called kind of casually called, it's not an official IRS term, but the widower tax penalty. That is the phenomena that if you're married, the tax brackets, the income levels at which tax brackets change are double for married folks compared to single folks. They literally get cut in half if you're single. So when you're married and one spouse dies, your income often doesn't go down as much as you think it does. You may lose some Social Security from your spouse's benefit stopping, but if your spouse has a pension, maybe that lives on for you. if you're the spouse, you're likely going to inherit all of your deceased spouse's retirement accounts, like 401ks, IRAs, whatever. So any required minimum distributions your deceased spouse had, guess what? You still have those same amounts now. Those don't change. So your income doesn't necessarily drop a lot. It probably drops a little, but not a lot. Your expenses may not go down much. I mean, yes, there's less food and less discretionary expenses probably, but you still may be in the same house. You still have a car. You still have utilities to pay for. So your expenses may not drop a lot, but your taxes double. Your federal taxes literally double. Your state taxes probably double or close to it as well. So that's the widower tax penalty. By having more of your money in Roth accounts as opposed to traditional tax deferred accounts, you'll lessen the burden of that widower tax penalty, because again, Roth accounts, when money is withdrawn, is not taxable. To couple with that, there's no required minimum distributions on Roth accounts. So you don't have to take the money out during your lifetime. If you inherit a Roth account, you do, but as the original account owner, you don't have to take money out. Even if when you do, though, it's not taxable. And same for your spouse. If you die and you leave your Roth IRA to your spouse can make that Roth IRA his or her own, just fold it into his or her own account. There's then no RMDs, required minimum distributions, on that Roth IRA for your surviving spouse. And we already touched on this before, but as far as legacy planning, wealth transfer, Roth accounts, Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks are generally not taxable in the hands of the heirs, whether it's your kids, your cousins, your distant relatives, your friends, whatever. Now, the reason why I say typically you're generally not taxable is, this is a little technical, but if you, as the original account owner, you have a Roth IRA, for example, if you did not have a Roth IRA for at least 5 years before you died, your heirs will have to pay tax on any gains they remove from the account if they remove it within 5 years from when you first opened the account. So for example, you opened the Roth IRA 3 years ago, you die today, your child inherits that account. Your child can't take out any gains from that account within 2 years. He or she needs to wait to finish out the 5 years from when you first opened the account. Then he or she can take out as much money as they want from that account with no tax or penalty. Any of your contributions can come out tax-free to your heirs. It's just the gains where your heirs need to wait 5 years from when you first opened your first Roth IRA before they can take gains out. So anyway, that's why I say it's usually not taxable to heirs, but there are some cases where it may be. Now, how the IRS or the accountant would ever know, your 5-year rule when you died, et cetera, I don't know. I don't know practically how much of a problem this is or if it's ever caught. My guess is it's probably not, but technically speaking, some of the gains may be taxable to heirs in Roth IRAs. Okay, next. Final thoughts. And I could be missing some things here, but these are just kind of, I was flowing, man. When I was making these slides, it was just blah, 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 blah coming out. I had a hard time kind of organizing it all into clean thoughts, but this is the best I can come up with. I'll say it again. Roth conversions cannot be undone. So don't just do conversions willy-nilly. You used to be able to undo them, but as of, I don't remember when it was, 2016, give or take, it's no longer allowed. So what you used to be able to do is convert like a big boatload in January, and then at the end of the year, you can clean it up. If you realize you converted too much, you can unconvert some. You can't do that now. Once you convert, it's over. There's no undoing it. So be careful with this. Understand the withdrawal rules around Roth accounts. There's lots of questions all the time in the group about the 5-year rule, of which there's actually 2. One of them is specific to Roth conversions. If you are under 59.5, you may have to wait 5 years after you convert to take that money out without penalty, 10% penalty. So I'll leave it there because this is a whole other rabbit hole I don't want to go down, but be clear on the Roth withdrawal rules so you understand your ability to access that money if and when you do conversions. Don't overdo it. I already touched on this, but you don't know exactly what other income you're going to have in the year. So usually you kind of want to wait till the end of the year so you have a better picture of what exactly your income, the rest of your income is, so you know how much room you have left to convert if you want to stay under a certain tax bracket or everything. And now these last 2, these are important. Not everyone needs to do conversions. Don't feel like you have to. And I'm one of many people guilty and at fault of beating the drum too much about conversions, future taxes, tax time bomb, blah, blah, blah. I try to never fearmonger, and I try to not sensationalize this stuff. I try to keep things as factual as possible. Me saying taxes will go up, granted that's speculation, but I'm really confident in saying that they will go up. Don't just because you hear everyone talking about conversions, and this group, we talk about it all the time. We belabor the point to death. You don't necessarily have to do it. Now, I'm not telling, this isn't specific advice. I'm not saying you watching do or don't. I'm just saying, don't feel like you need to do conversions. Don't think conversions are always the answer. Don't think you're always going to benefit from conversions. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. So anyway, don't get caught up on the feeling that, oh my God, everyone's talking about it, I must be missing something, I have to do conversions. Along with that, if you do decide to do conversions, there is no right amount. It's logically a great question that everyone wants to know is, how much should I convert? Or how much is the right amount of mix to have going into retirement of tax deferred money, Roth money, traditional brokerage money, HSA money? I don't know, right? So there's just so many variables about the future between how long you're going to live, what exactly your expenses will be every year for the rest of your life, what the financial markets are going to do, stocks, bonds, interest rates, what inflation is going to do. And the other big, huge unknown, what's taxes going to do, not just now and in the near term, but 5, 10, 20 years down the road. Beats me. So these are all just educated guesses that we're trying to do based on the best analysis and assumptions and kind of rational thinking we can do now. The best I can say is how much you should convert or how much you should target to have in each account type is a healthy mix. Whether that means a third in tax deferred, Roth, and regular brokerage assets, or 40% tax deferred and then 30-30. I don't know. You want to try to avoid having the vast majority of your money in tax deferred accounts. Outside of that, there is no precise math we can do. I mean, we can, but it'd be futile to try to kid yourself into thinking you can nail down an answer, a precise answer. This stuff is all just kind of logical, educated guessing. So there is no right amount. Now, within year to year, in terms of doing conversions, yes, if you want to stay under the 24% tax bracket, then sure, you can back it to an exact dollar amount of, okay, let me convert, $62,000 to get myself to the top of this bracket. But longer term, I don't know, right? It's kind of gut feel, it's kind of intuition, it's kind of how much are you personally concerned about distrusting the government and how high taxes may be and whatever. Some people want to do more conversions than others and are willing to pay a lot more tax today to save themselves the uncertainty of what taxes will be in the future. Other people are like, I don't really care. I'm good. Whatever it is, it is. I'm happy. I'm not concerned about running out of money. I don't want to bother with all this stuff. I'll just do my thing. And that could be the right answer for you. So really all depends. Okay. That's it. I will pull off the slides now and take, it's 9 o'clock already. Take some questions. Let's see where we were. Wow, a lot of questions here. What's this? Ken Waters. Social Security is a big factor. I'm converting now before filing, as I already have a pension. Once Social Security is filed plus pension, will push tax rate up. So my goal is convert, use as much traditional IRA as possible before filing Social Security. Yeah, I thought I had a slide on that. Let me just look. Do I not? I guess I don't. Yeah, so one thing I wanted to mention, I don't know why I didn't have it on here. Ken, this goes exactly to what you're saying. There's something people call a tax planning window, for example. It's the years after, and I started touching on this before, after you stop working, so your wages go away, but before you start Social Security, if you have a pension before you start that, so you have like next to no taxable income. You're going to have some bank interest. Maybe you have some dividends from your brokerage account. If you have a rental, maybe you get some rental income. But that's it. That's the lowest your income is going to be the rest of your life, because once Social Security starts, that doesn't stop. Once your pension starts, that doesn't stop. Once you hit 72 and need to start taking required minimum distributions from your tax deferred accounts, those don't stop. So you have this period of potentially multiple years where you're otherwise in a really low income environment. Those are the years you want to get ahead of your large tax deferred balances. Now, whether that means doing conversions Good. That's one way. Keep in mind, you have to have cash to pay taxes on those, or just simply spend down your traditional IRA or traditional 401k while you're in this low tax environment. As a married couple, you can have 105 grand of gross income roughly and still only be at the 12% federal tax bracket. That's good. That's really good. So, if you can pull out money from an IRA to float you those handful of years where you're waiting to start your pension, you're waiting to defer Social Security to let it grow, that's a good long-term tax planning strategy, is have some control over when you recognize the income from your tax deferred accounts, and therefore when you pay tax on it. So good comment, Ken. Thank you for bringing that up. I swore I had a slide on that, but I guess I didn't. What's this? When converting from a traditional IRA to Roth IRA, don't forget to look at the state-specific rules that might impact state taxes. In New York State, you can subtract up to 20 grand of retirement income per qualifying person. Let's say the goal is to convert 40. I may want to convert 20 from mine, 20 from my husband's. Yes, great point. So, and I rarely, partly my fault, partly because there's just way too many states to possibly cover for everybody. But by default, all of the discussions and things I talk about are referring to federal taxes. Occasionally, you'll catch me throwing a comment about state, but always also consider state taxes. Now, for the most part, it's the federal taxes that should drive your decision making, because in absolute terms, federal taxes are a lot higher than state taxes. But that doesn't mean you should disregard state taxes. Do be aware of it as a sort of secondary consideration. Like this poster posted, in New York, each spouse, if you're married, can exclude up to 20 grand of retirement income, including Roth conversions, from state tax. That's a nice little treat. Illinois, for example, excludes IRA. I don't forget if there's up to a limit or not, but excludes IRA distributions. Or am I making that up? No, Pennsylvania. Illinois might as well. Now I'm drawing a blank. Pennsylvania definitely has a retirement income exclusion. So states matter. And that's one of the reasons why people retire to different states, to sort of arbitrage and take advantage of different tax treatments in different states. Good comment. These slides are great. Oh, thank you. I thought they're pretty boring. I was hoping to get more graphs in there. This is all just text, but hopefully it was punchy, succinct text and not just letters for the sake of letters. Cool. Alan Thomas, seems a bit tricky. Only 50% of Social Security is counted towards determined tax rate, so it depends on how much you need to. Yeah, right. So figuring out how much of your Social Security taxable is this kind of circular, funky math you really can't do easily without tax prep software or like online calculators that will let you kind of plug and play mock tax return stuff. I'm thinking of filling the 12% bracket with pre-tax dollars that would have been taxed at 22% is a no-brainer, even with state tax considered. Yes, Craig. State tax, generally mid-single-digit percent for most people if you have state tax. The higher ones like California, 9+%, potentially more. But generally speaking, state tax, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8%. Most states. To clarify, do Roth conversions penalty free after 5 years? You open the account even if you're 59 and a half. So there's two different 5-year rules. If you're over 59 and a half, you can withdraw the amounts you converted at any time with no tax or penalty. Withdrawing gains on those conversions, or gains on your contributions for that matter, you won't have to pay a penalty, but you'll have to pay tax if your first Roth IRA isn't at least 5 years old. Make sense? So if you're over 59 and a half, the 5-year rule specific to conversions does not apply to you, period. Stop, throw it out. Don't even worry about it. You only have to worry about the other general overarching 5-year rule, which is first Roth IRA needs to be at least 5 years old, and you need to be at least 59 and a half. Those two things need to happen for you to be able to take out gains tax-free from your account. I know general advice is to use outside money to pay taxes on conversions. Does it ever make sense to use money converted to pay taxes if you don't have a lot of outside money? I hate saying this, but it depends. If conversions really will, if the analysis shows that conversions should really benefit you and you have no other way to pay the tax, then take additional distributions from your IRA to use to pay the tax, then sure, that could make sense. One thing to consider is if you're under 59 and a half, those additional distributions you're taking will be subject to the 10% penalty. In addition to being taxed, you'll have to pay the 10% penalty because those amounts you use to pay tax are not considered conversions. They're considered traditional distributions. So under 59 and a half, that can be a problem. Over 59 and a half, sure, that 10% penalty goes away. You can make IRA distributions to use as withholdings, do 100% withholding of that to pay the taxes. That's possible. Without a lot of granular number running, I can't say if it definitely makes sense for you, but yes, in theory it can. The other thing to keep in mind, and I try not to get too caught up in this, is again, we're fooling ourselves if we think, myself included, if we think we can get super precise with these figures. And retirement planning in general, understandably, clients and you all want answers around, run this, show that, let's be as granular as possible with these assumptions and withdrawals and whatever. But when we're projecting out 30 to 40 years, this plan is wrong. This plan will change. This plan will become outdated. So not to say we shouldn't try to be as accurate as possible, but there comes a point where you're splitting hairs with this analysis, and whether you convert, $32,000 or $32,500, it frankly doesn't matter, in the grand scheme of things. And this is one of those examples is where I'm going with this, is whether you pay taxes with cash you have, ideally that's great. If you don't have cash and you have to pay by taking withdrawals from your IRA, not as ideal, but in the grand scheme of things, this is, I don't want to say it's a rounding error, but this should be the least of your concerns with your longer term tax planning. Let me put it that way. At least that's my opinion. So let's not get too hung up on trying to have finite and nailed down, to the penny answers with any sort of long-term projections, because we're kidding ourselves to think we can get this stuff right when we're projecting out 40 years with lots of variables that will change. But we want to try to be as reasonably accurate as possible. Okay, sidebar over. What is this? Great comment, Andy. Well, thank you, Cody. Your Roth conversion strategy should be refined on an annual basis. This does not have to be a permanent decision to convert X amount over the next Y years, etc. Exactly. And that's what I do in practice, is have a loose idea in mind of kind of like what you want to try to get your tax deferred to your Roth IRA balances to. But it will change year by year. And retirement planning, distribution planning in general, needs to be done year by year. You definitely can't set it and forget it. Every year is going to change your life circumstances, financial markets, your income needs, tax legislation, right? What accounts go up or go down relative to one another. Those all change every year. So ideally, distribution planning should be this kind of tactical, kind of figure it out as we go year by year, which I know sounds concerning to some people, and I get it. But that's my approach. I think that's the best approach, to stay flexible and agile and kind of figure out what makes the most sense every year as time and life and financial markets and taxes play themselves out, over time. What's the time frame for when to pay the tax owed after a Roth conversion? Yeah, this gets back to where I started to touch on before with estimated payments. If you're paying the tax by way of increasing withholdings, you can do that whenever in the year. Withholdings have no time associated with them. Whether you do your withholding in January or December, as long as you withhold the right amount throughout the course of the year, the timing does not matter. Estimated payments are different. If you're paying your entire estimated bill evenly throughout the year, you want to break it up into 4 chunks quarterly. If you are doing the annualize your income method I mentioned before, so like let's say you do a big fat conversion in October, and therefore you're going to pay the additional tax on that conversion in that quarter, you have to pay it by January 15th. It doesn't matter. You don't have to pay it the day of the conversion, the month of the conversion. It just needs to be paid by the end of that IRS quarter. And that IRS quarter's payment deadline is January 15th in the case of doing the conversion in October. Hopefully that answered it. Yes, taxable brokerage accounts seem a good deal too for many people. Definitely. They underrated, not given enough attention. People just kind of focus on tax deferred and Roth accounts. And Roth accounts are great. I'm not saying they're not. But for people who are phased out of making Roths or otherwise can't get money into Roths or aren't in a position where they can do conversions because they have a lot of income, don't forget about regular taxable brokerage accounts. Plow money into them. If you can invest tax efficiently don't have lots of mutual funds that throw off big fat capital gains every year, you can keep your tax throughout the years quite low with some good tax efficient investment management, investment making in a regular taxable brokerage account. And you have flexibility with these, right? When you decide you need money out of a taxable brokerage account, you can pick and choose what you sell. Maybe some things are at loss, maybe some things are at a gain. You can kind of match those two together, flatten yourself out tax-wise. It makes the planning a little more tactical and hands-on, unfortunately, but you do often have some good options with taking distributions from a regular taxable account. Okay, a lot of good questions here. Is it a good idea to save some taxable funds to fill up the standard deduction? Yes, that is. So by taxable funds, I assume you mean tax deferred, like IRAs, 401ks. So yes, that is one of the main reasons why you don't necessarily want to completely convert away or completely give up all of your tax deferred money, right? There could be years where you can use that to fill up your standard deductions, or if you're charitably inclined, when you're over 70 and a half, you can do what's called qualified charitable distributions, which is where you donate money straight away out of your IRA to a charity. That leaves, it's not taxable to you, it's not taxable to the charity. That's another great way to make use of IRAs, tax deferred money. So that's another reason supporting why you don't want to get rid of all your tax deferred money. Another thing, long-term care / healthcare costs. Let's assume when you're 85, 90, you have a really expensive few years of healthcare. So maybe you pull $100,000 a year out of your IRA to pay for that healthcare. You'd be like, wow, that's $100,000 of additional taxable income. Not really. It's $100,000 of gross income. But if you're using all of it to pay for healthcare expenses, guess what? You now have really large medical deductions those years that will help defray how much of that ends up ultimately being taxable. So that's another possible use of tax deferred money, and another reason why you may not want to convert away all of your tax deferred funds. And legacy planning as well. Like I said, if you know you're going to be leaving some of your money to kids, and those kids are in relatively low tax brackets, ain't no harm in leaving them tax deferred accounts. Let them pay the tax on it if they're in, again, fairly low tax brackets. Okay. That's not for me, I assume. Why is it a bad idea to use your Social Security to help pay tax on conversion? Assuming you don't need the Social Security that year to live on. I don't know if this was in response to someone else's question, but it's not a bad idea. Social Security is cash. Assuming, let's say you bring in $30,000 a year in Social Security, you only spend 15 of it, you have 15 grand left over. It's not a bad idea. You can use that excess cash to pay tax on conversions if conversions make sense for you. Good comment. Isn't it better to do smaller conversions throughout the year rather than one huge lump sum? It depends. Going back to that slide I had before, historically speaking, markets go up more than they go down. So that would support doing one big fat conversion early in the year, when in theory, the things you buy after the conversion, the securities you buy, should go up after that. You'd rather buy when things are low as opposed to wait till the end of the year and convert and buy when things are high. So that supports doing one big fat lump sum. But what goes against that now is what I mentioned before, with not overdoing it, not knowing what the rest of your income is going to be for the year. So therefore, kind of wait towards the end of the year to do a lot of your conversion, or at least to do like the final amount of your conversion. So maybe you land somewhere in between. Maybe, yes, you do, instead of doing 12 grand a year in conversions, or 12 grand in one lump sum, you do $1,000 a month. And along the way, if something happens and you realize, oops, I have more income than I thought, then maybe you stop your conversions halfway through the year. So then you only converted, 6 grand for the year instead of 12. So there's really no right or best answer to this. There's different pros and cons of each. But the main goal is you don't want to overdo it inadvertently. So whether that means you convert in smaller chunks or you wait till the end of the year and do a lump sum, it's kind of up to you to figure out what makes the most sense. Roth conversion strategy is like a chess game. Every year presents a new scenario, just as in chess. How you move is dependent on how your opponent's last move. Exactly. Which I know it's difficult and uneasy for people to hear, especially when you work with a professional and he or she, like me, says, well, I can't really tell you what the best thing is going to do, what the best thing to do is in year 2, year 3, year 4. We kind of have to wait and see. But it's so true. There's so many moving pieces where every year the analysis and the decision and the what's best at the time is going to be slightly different. So great comment, whoever this was. All right, looks like one final question here. Is there a recommended percentage of tax-free versus tax-deferred money to hold? I know it's not one size fits all, but is there a ballpark? A great, logical, understandable question, but no. Again, my super dumbed down back of the envelope is just simply a third, if you can get there. A third in regular tax. A third in tax-deferred, a third in Roth, a third in regular taxable brokerage accounts. But again, really all depends. Like if you're super charitably inclined, and let's assume you have a lot of pension and Social Security such that it kind of covers most or all of your anticipated expenses, such that you don't really need most or any of your investable assets. In that case, maybe you end up giving it all away to charity. If that's the case, then leave it all in tax-deferred accounts, right? Just start doing massive qualified charitable distributions when you're 70 and a half. No one pays a tax on that. It goes straight to charity. Everything's good. So that's one example where, there's no harm in having 100% of your assets in tax-deferred money. For most people, that's not the case, but I don't know. Just like I said, generally speaking, you want to avoid having all of your assets in tax-deferred unless you're in that extreme charitable scenario I just mentioned. But outside of that, how much is right? I don't know. You don't want to overdo it as well, right? Maybe do some conversions, but you don't want to do so much where you're paying so much tax now that you end up not being able to eventually kind of reap the benefits of all the taxes you pay today. It's a tough one. Great question. And it's part of the frustrating thing with trying to, have this discussion and walk through this with folks. Can you convert profit sharing shares to a Roth? I don't know. If it's traditional tax deferred, maybe. Like if profit sharing is just simply a discretionary match your employer dumped into your 401k, then sure, that should be eligible. But if it's some other special standalone like stock purchase or stock incentive plan, then I don't know. My guess is probably not, but I really don't know. Good question. Why so much in taxable? I can do so much in Roth or tax deferred. I'm not sure if that was a response to someone else, but okay. I guess we'll leave it here. Thank you. Oh, it's wow, hour 20 minutes. This was a lengthy one. Hopefully you found this helpful. I know it's kind of all over the place and a bit scattered. I tried to organize this as logically as possible, but like I said, as I was writing this, it was just like, wow, there's so much to talk about here. Cool. I will leave it at that. Don't forget to come back next week. Again, Beth Rowan. We'll be talking all about emergency preparedness and disaster recovery. I'm definitely looking forward to that one. Until then, have a good week. Take care.